My guest is pianist, composer, producer, and two-time Grammy nominee Greg Manning. He's performing at Gambit in Henderson this Saturday, July 15th at 9 p.m. For ticket information, go to gambithenderson.com. And for everything about Greg Manning, go to gregmanningmusic.com. And you can follow him on Spotify, Apple Music, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Bands in Town, and Twitter, and 90 million other platforms. You're in more places than I am, Greg. And welcome to the show.
Hi, Ira. Thanks for
Hi.
having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. People don't necessarily know where you're from because it's hard for people to guess that slight accent, but we know it's Switzerland.
It is Switzerland. I was actually born in Africa, Nigeria, but at a very early age, I was probably like 3 or 4 months. We moved to Switzerland, and that's where I grew up, near Zurich.
Ah, okay. So at any one time, if I were to ask you, you would reach into your pocket and bring out a Swiss Army knife, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
I'm prepared. Yes, sir.
Well, I wanted to have you on because you have an interesting background and you're very talented, but I was curious why you picked, of all the genres, why you picked jazz more than old classical, rock, blues, whatever. Why was it jazz for you particularly?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it just spoke to me the most. In the beginning, I had some classical training. We all start with classical piano. I did that for a while, but I think for me, everything changed when I heard Herbie Hancock for the first time. That was like an epiphany. I was like, man, what is this? Such great playing, and it just grabbed me, and I gravitated towards that. But and that was kind of a jazz snob in the beginning, and I'm laughing now because nowadays I listen to everything. To me, there's value in good music in any genre,
Mhm.
be it country, classical, hip hop, jazz.
Well,
I like everything.
Greg, how old were you when you had that epiphany and realized you wanted to get into jazz?
Was relatively late, a lot of my peers in music, they start like 4 or 5. Well,
Mhm.
at that age, I think I was around 11 or 12. And also the funny thing is, I tell this to a lot of people when I'm on stage. In the beginning, I wasn't interested in music. My classmates, they had their favorite singers, their favorite band. I was like, yeah, music. But then I listened to Herbie, and also I forgot to mention Stevie Wonder. There's one song in particular called "Isn't She Lovely." I heard that song on the radio in Switzerland, and I was like, man, what is this? I just want to learn more about it.
Did you ever get a chance to meet either Stevie Wonder or Herbie Hancock to tell them
I
the influence?
I yes, never Stevie, unfortunately, but I have met Herbie, and as a matter of fact, for a while I was in the same Buddhist group that he is, Soka Gakkai, and we even chanted together. We
Nice.
practiced together,
Was
and
he
he's a remarkable man,
He
remarkable
is.
man.
Was he surprised that he influenced you? Because I suspect, and I don't know the man, but he doesn't have that raging ego that a lot of people have. So he might have been genuinely surprised that you were inspired by him, even though he's incredibly talented.
Yeah, I think I think Herbie he's humble, but I think he also knows his place in jazz history.
Mhm.
He's a giant. He's a giant, and in order to really be a modern jazz pianist, you can't really not study Herbie, and I think he knows that. But he's very humble, and I think he also realizes that. Uh, Keith Jarrett used to say this. Keith Jarrett says, babies don't come from babies and music doesn't come from music. Life influences music and
Right.
life informs music. And I think Herbie is involved in a lot of other stuff than in music, like Buddhism. And I think that also greatly informs his music.
Did growing up in Switzerland, and you were obviously involved with Universal Music Switzerland, you've had several Swiss chart toppers there since 1996. Does that growing up in Switzerland give you a different bent or a different view as typical musicians growing up in the United States, either in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, New Orleans, etc.?
I think yes, I think definitely. But the funny thing was, when I was active in Switzerland,
Hmm.
so many people, including my fellow musicians, record labels, they always told me that my music sounded too American. And I thought it was kind of funny because all my heroes basically were American musicians. So at one point I decided, well, maybe I should study music in America, and I went to Berklee College of Music. So to answer your question, I think growing up in Switzerland, the musical environment in Switzerland actually kind of forced me to go out of the country and explore the American music scene.
Was it more formal in Switzerland than here in America as far as growing up with music and
I
performing
think
music?
what I always admired, and it's not that prevalent anymore, unfortunately. But like American high schools, they had a strong history of band, you know, and unfortunately the arts are not supported that much anymore. So I think in Switzerland we didn't have that. So I think like the formal education is or at the time was actually better in America, believe it or not.
Mhm.
We didn't have band in high school.
It's an interesting story because we think of the Swiss, some of us think of the Swiss similar to the Germans, much more formal in their language and presentation. And that's such the opposite of what jazz is all about. So you had to thread that needle coming from a background growing up. Well, you started in Nigeria, but obviously you left at a very young age. But you're growing up in Switzerland, which has a very, I guess, formal culture in a way, and yet you are into the world of jazz, which, if anything, it's informal, spontaneous, etc. So, how did you thread that needle? How did you make that adjustment?
That's an interesting question, and I think I do many things. I'm not just piano. I mean, I'm not just doing piano playing.
Right.
I'm also writing. I'm producing, and I think the organizational skills come in when I produce. Just keeping a project on schedule, making sure everything is timed right, organization with the computer. I think these skills that are basically my Swiss background, I think they come in handy
It's
for
like a
other things.
it's like a Swiss timepiece, right? You're very exact.
Yes,
No, that's
exactly.
great. You have
But
both sides of it.
yes. But I also, I guess, in jazz, in piano music and jazz, that there are formal things. You have to practice. That's actually something I'm kind of rediscovering right now. In order to execute flawlessly what you hear, what you feel, if you don't have the technique, if you don't have the facility, you can do much, and you start repeating yourself. So I think the formal thing in jazz, it also exists. People just don't talk about it so much. And I think the formal thing in jazz is knowing your history, where everything comes from.
Isn't it also the formal part of jazz when you get the basics down and then you can improvise within the song, for example, or within the tune? So you have the structure laid down by the writer and the composer, but then it allows you as a musician to improvise.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the song form is essential in jazz. The jazz blues, but I think uh, as you said, the formal thing in jazz, it is important, and also in the beginning you need to learn the basics. Also in jazz, the scales, chords, different voicings,
Exactly.
and once you know these things, once it's ingrained in you, then you can actually forget about it. I was just spacing for a second because it actually took me back to Berklee College of Music, where I attended classes, and I'll never forget this. College is not cheap, so it was quite expensive, and I took these advanced classes at the end, and in advanced harmony, after we learned all the rules in advanced harmony, at the end we were told, well, guys, now you can forget about everything that we taught you, because you can basically go from any chord to any chord if the melody is strong enough. So, it just took me back to that place. You got
Did
to
you
learn, you got to have the formal training. And once that's kind of ingrained in you, you can forget about everything.
did you feel betrayed when you realized at the advance that you could go back to doing what you want?
Actually, it was a pivotal moment in my school history, and I felt joy and kind of relief, and I always say, people say music theory is important, which it is,
Right.
but never forget, music theory is not out from a vacuum. It was based on what musicians were doing before there was music history. Bach, for example, he didn't know any music theory. He just created what he heard in his musical brain in his ears. And I think that's very important. Theory is important, but the most important thing in music is you got to hear the music first and then execute it.
When you hear the music, are you hearing it technically or are you hearing it, I don't want to use the word emotionally, but in a way that's different from the technical part? You get the sense of the music and then you're able to work with it. Or is it a combination of the two? You're hearing it technically, but you're also hearing it in terms of a rhythm or a sense of what the music is.
I think in my case it's like twofold. When I compose, I walk around the house, searching for melody, hoping for inspiration to hit. Then I kind of hear the song in my head. It's like a radio is playing. But when you play jazz and you improvise in the moment on the spot, then you don't really have time to think about it. And I think neurologically it's very, very interesting what's happening in real time when you improvise, because the great improvisers, they're actually composers in real time. Like just the other day I listened to Miles, his solo in So What, and I could swear to you this was like written out. It's so perfect, the way it's built, the way he tells the story, the elements he uses, and I think nothing is really random. It's quite amazing.
And Soul of Spain, he also did. I mean, he did a lot of stuff.
Yes, yes, yes. Gil Evans' arrangement.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
You mentioned earlier about the Berklee College of Music, and I think some people watching us and listening to us think it's Berkeley as in Berkeley, California, but it's a different spelling of Berkeley.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's from the founder, Burke Lee, Lee.
Got it. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
do you credit the school for your subsequent success, or do you view it as one of the planks of your success? In other words, it gave you a foundation, but I have the feeling you would have succeeded even without attending.
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I'm forever grateful for all the students that I met at Berkeley. I mean, the education was great. I had great teachers. Amongst one of them was uh, what's his name? I'm spacing. Walter Beasley. He was my ear training teacher, and now he's a great smooth jazz artist in his own right. But the most I've learned at Berkeley was actually from other students. We used to do like jam sessions, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. We would get phone calls around midnight. Hey, Greg, are you available to jam?
All right.
And those things were so precious. You just learn so much, just improvising, learning to play with other musicians.
Do you encounter some of these fellow former students on the road or in LA or in some professional setting now years later?
Yes, yeah, definitely. One of them is Mindy Abair, one of the greats in smooth jazz sax playing. We went to school there together for a while, and I see her quite often. I actually used to be her keyboard player for a second in her band,
I think you're
and
a keyboard player for everybody for looking at your credits.
yeah,
Yeah,
I play a lot of keys for different artists.
right.
Yes, and again, because of Berkeley, I met Jonathan Butler. Jonathan did a master class there, and I was the keyboard player. They one of the professors put a band together, and I was the keyboard player for Jonathan. And that little thing opened a lot of doors for me, because then Jonathan came back and said, "Hey, Greg, why don't you play in my band?"
Nice.
And I started playing with him for almost 10 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, he's been a guest on the show. He's an incredible talent.
Yes, yes, he is.
And when you talk to people who have that kind of talent, as I get a chance to, an opportunity to, and I'm grateful for it too, you get a sense of the love that people have for their art. And whether it's music or writing or painting or whatever it is, and regardless of where they are in the status of that particular world, there's that love of the art that comes through. And I detect that from you as well. Clearly, you just love doing it, and you not just play, but you obviously compose and you work with other artists. So you're a well-rounded artist in that sense, that you can participate in the genre that you want to and work with different kinds of people.
That is a very, very good observation. But because the core of everything is really, it's kind of the love and also the mystery about music. But because when I sit at the piano, walk around the house, where do these melodies come from? I've been doing this for decades now, and I still cannot tell you where it comes from. But keeping the curiosity and just the love for music is really essential, because sometimes, like in any career, the business of music can be tough, you know.
Oh yes, you're on the road, and separate from the music, you just have to do all these other things. I want to talk to you a little
Yes.
bit about your upcoming appearance and performance at Gambit in a moment, but I also want to touch on your album. It's A Song for Peace. Tell us a little bit about the album.
Yes, actually, it's right here. I
Great.
took it
For
out.
those listening, Greg is holding it up. Very nice. So there
Yes,
it is.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
get away from the
It
reflection. Do it one more time, Greg, so we can see it again without the reflection of the light. There it is. There it is.
is this
Perfect.
better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, cool,
Perfect.
cool, cool. It just came out on June 16th, and I haven't put out an album in a long time, and I thought, man, it's time to do it. There are some singles, previously released singles on there, but I think I have five new songs on the album. And I collaborated with a lot of musicians. A lot of musicians, artists are featured, and it was just a blast doing it. I had Julian Vaughn on there. Kirk Whalum is on there. So in my opinion, it's a very cool CD. I'm glad I did it.
Now, with technology being what it is these days, were you recording it in your own studio or in a studio, a professional studio, or different professional studios?
No, I actually recorded it right here. So in the back here, I'm sitting in my studio,
Ah,
and this
nice.
is it. And this is it. It's a home studio. It's not too big, but nowadays with technology, it's really amazing. It's really amazing what we have in a little computer nowadays. 10, 15 years ago, you would have to have a huge studio to record and execute and mix what we can do nowadays in the box. It's the technology is just amazing. Having said that, one
Yes,
thing, there's always an asterisk.
of course.
Having said that, what I miss sometimes is being in the same room with other musicians and playing music down at the same time. That doesn't happen too often anymore. Nowadays, it's like you send files around, and
Mhm.
one guy or girl adds her music, and then you send it to the next person.
You're in isolation in a way. So it's almost in the COVID era there where you just,
Yes,
uh, but you do have to contend with, of course, when you have a home professional studio, unless you're well padded, you have to deal with the neighbors.
I am so lucky in this way. I mean, I have some room treatment, and it's insulated, but isolated. That's the word, isolated.
Yeah, isolated.
But my neighbors seem to be very forgiving. Sometimes I play 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
and so far no complaints.
Excellent.
So fingers crossed. I hope it's going to
Well,
stay
I
this
think
way.
that you know how the best thing to do is, now that the album's out, knock on the door, give them a copy of the album. Thank him
I
for.
already did. I
Oh, you
already did
did.
that. Yes, I already bribed them. So
I wasn't going to use
Yes,
that term,
yes.
but yes, in essence, that's what it is. It's a
Absolutely.
post-product, so yeah, because you already
Yes,
done
yes,
it.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
also a sense of gratitude that they didn't complain while you were doing that. So tell us a little bit about, is this your first time in Las Vegas, and is this your first time at Gambit?
It's actually going to be my second time. I played there before, I think about a year ago, and I love the club. You know, it's rather small, intimate, and I just love it because when I look in the audience, I can see everybody's face. It's really nice, and they have a new sound system, and it sounds really good in there. So I'm looking forward to it.
And they have quite the schedule. I looked at the upcoming calendar, and they book quite a bit ahead. So that's impressive as well.
Yes, the AAE group, I think they're called. They're very, very active right now.
Mhm.
It's nice, and I think it's great to have this kind of support for the format for smooth jazz. It's very nice.
I don't think I've ever asked a guest this question, but you'd be the perfect person to answer the question. And I ask it from not from a sense of ignorance, but more of curiosity. And that is, we hear the term smooth jazz to differentiate it from jazz in general. How would you define smooth jazz from your point of view?
Whoa, that's a very good question, and I'm probably gonna have a hard time defining it, but I mean, the older I get, to me, music is just music, and essentially, record labels created those labels.
Mhm.
Smooth jazz, straight ahead, rock, pop. To me, it's basically just music. But I think there are some elements, in opposition to like straight ahead jazz, in smooth jazz. It's almost like, to me, my explanation would be smooth jazz is almost like instrumental R&B.
Ah, okay.
There's a strong backbeat on two and four. There are some funk elements, and I mean, it's kind of a broad definition, but to me, it's actually instrumental R&B. At least that's how I approach it. That's how I create music in that format.
Well, I think too, as you get older, you could call it mellow jazz as you mellow
Yes,
out
yes.
in that
That,
sense.
that, that's true. That's true. Though not everything is mellow, I
True.
have kind of have a reputation to be more on the funky side of smooth jazz, which I enjoy.
That's kind of an interesting combination, funky, smooth jazz.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So
Well, I'm trying to do it. It can be done.
it can with a little Swiss flavor, in that sense.
Yes, 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 yes.
Because you've been in the United States a while, you moved to Los Angeles, I think in 2002. And
Yes,
uh,
correct.
do you hear back from your friends and fellow musicians and others in Switzerland as they hear of your success and your performances in the United States?
I do. Although it's kind of hard for me to really, keep in touch with all my friends in Switzerland. But once in a while on Messenger, Facebook, I get a message, or once in a while I get like a Zoom call, Facebook call, and I talk to people. Yes.
That's good. I think you could create a new genre coming from Switzerland, and you could call it neutral jazz.
That we
What do you
we
think?
we are known for that. Yes, we are known for that.
I
Yeah,
could
yeah,
just see
yeah.
it, it's somewhat safe. It's not taking any extreme side. It's just kind of there.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right, right,
that could
right.
work. That's funny. Are you working on, we just talked about your current album, A Song for Peace, and
Yes.
at the same time that you're performing around and working with others as well, so you're doing everything. Are you also working on future albums at this time?
I always work on my own music, and whenever I finish a song, I just store it in my computer, and when the time is right, I release the song. I just had a single out called "The One," featuring Julian Vaughn, and in about a month or so, I'm going to release my next single to radio.
Excellent. And of course, I could always go to gregmanningmusic.com and order your album there, as well as follow
Ye-
where you are in the world of jazz.
yes, yes. If you go to my website directly, you can actually get a signed and autographed copy of my CD. Would
Excellent.
love to send this. Would love to send this out to people.
Do you find that you appeal to a wide range of music lovers? And the reason I ask that question, coming from your unusual background, we don't think of too many people from Switzerland that are in the world of jazz. That may be my ignorance if there are a lot of people, but you're the only one that I know of. So does that, as a result of being from that background, do you find you're able to touch a lot of different people, a lot of different ways? And when I say touch, meaning musically.
Yeah, I think so. I have a feeling that like my you know my diverse background, or also culturally, it seeps into my music, and maybe when people listen to it, they can relate to it. They're maybe not sure why, but I think so. And you know, again, it's life that influences music. And one of the perks of being a musician is traveling. I've, especially with Jonathan Butler, when I was active in his band, we traveled the world. We were everywhere, and those experiences, you know, different cultures, tasting different food, it's just a great thing, and it has influenced my music a great deal. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Are you looking to do something totally different in addition to your music, and whether that is something non-music, whether it's writing a play, a memoir, a story, any of that? Are you looking at doing a little bit of that as well?
I've already done that actually. In the year 2022, I released an album called Between the Sun and the Moon, and it's completely different from smooth jazz. It's more of a soundtrack without a movie. And I always envisioned to bring this eventually on stage and do like a multimedia presentation of it. It's still simmering. The music is released, but I see the whole thing on stage with a small orchestra, with dancers. It's in my mind, but I think when you listen to the music, you will hear what I have in mind with it. But it's completely different from my smooth jazz stuff.
And you did that during COVID where you were home and stuck, and
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, I worked on that particular project for about 15 years.
that's a
And
long time.
it's a long time. It's a long time. And also I had to be very patient because, you know, I'm not able to hire the London Symphonic or Orchestra, you know, the London Symphony.
Right,
It's just not going to happen.
right,
So I had kind of wait until technology catches up to
right.
actually capture those players and have these orchestral sounds at my fingertip. I had to wait a little bit to execute what I actually heard in my mind.
Well,
It's very orchestral.
but the fact that it took you that long, you obviously wanted to get it right, and you were waiting patiently for those moments where you could integrate what you've created into another form. So that no, that makes perfect sense. Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Greg Manning. He's performing at Gambit in Henderson this Saturday, July 15th at 9 p.m. For ticket information, go to gambithenderson.com. And for everything about Greg Manning, go to gregmanningmusic.com. And you can follow him on Spotify, Apple Music, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Bands in Town, and Twitter, and probably the Swiss Army Knife Factory as well. So, Greg, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ira, for having me. Appreciate it too.
See you next time.